YouTubers and trolls, welcome back to Telesplash Gaming. And speaking of trolls, I have to laugh because on my last video, the unboxing my modded PS2, Fathered Puma 81 asked me if I was blind because I didn't see the SATA hard drive connection right away, which, I mean, he's not really wrong. I'm wearing contacts right now and I wear glasses whenever I game, so I guess I'm a little blind. And then at the very end, he explained to me why I couldn't judge a hard drive based on its appearance only, that I needed to plug it in, run a program, see how much it's been used and how many hours are on it. Anyway, so with that, Fathered Puma 81, you get a stripe on your Troll Nation white belt. And now moving on to the content. Guys, I had a great time doing research for this video just because I was so surprised by some of the sequels that I found. I had no idea a couple of these games even existed. So I hope there's at least one or two that surprise you guys as much as I was surprised. So check it out. These are some of gaming's lesser known sequels. Starting off our list today is going to be Viewtiful Joe 2, released on both the GameCube and the PS2 in November of 2004. Now this is a sequel to the cult classic, highly praised, side-scrolling beat-em-up Viewtiful Joe. Now, although I never played the original, I knew about it. I saw it when I was at Hastings. Every time I got paid, I would pop into Hastings and buy a new game. And I always thought about buying Viewtiful Joe, but I just never did. And the first game was so unique in its presentation and story that the highly praised sequel never quite gets as much love as the original. And even though it's very similar in every way, it's also very similar that it had very modest sales numbers. In addition to these, there's actually been two other spin-off games, one for the GameCube and one for the Nintendo DS. Now the next game on our list is Resident Evil Code Veronica. The original release was for the Dreamcast in February of 2000 before getting ported to the PS2 and GameCube with an additional content such as cutscenes, and then it also had an X at the end. And that's pretty much to make sure players knew this wasn't the same old Dreamcast port, but the definitive gameplay experience for one of survival horror's most popular franchises. Now, this one is definitely well known by many gamers, but I feel it never quite gets enough credit it deserves, so it's going to be making an appearance on my list. Resident Evil 1 is great because of the legacy it created. 2 and 3 pushed the gameplay and storyline forward with incredible boss battles and branching storylines. But Code Veronica is kind of like that third child who wasn't really planned, but it's still loved and welcome. But by the time the first couple games came out, it was starting to get a little stagnant with the tank controls. But I still believe this is the best game out of the first 4 that were released, in my opinion, with the tank controls. So it's kind of a shame, as this, like I said, is probably one of the better games with the visuals, including the removal of pre-rendered backgrounds and replaced with 3D environments, and it has one of the weirdest and most intriguing storylines in Resident Evil to date. So if you haven't had a chance to play this one, if you can get past the old tank controls, this one really is a good game. Up next is Musashi Samurai Legend, released on the PS2. Now, it's the sequel to Brave Fencer Musashi, which was released on the PS1. It's an action role-playing game, and this sequel really tries to build on the generally favorable reviews the original received, based on RPG and action elements that flowed together really well to create a charming and fun experience. But unfortunately, this sequel received mediocre reviews and has been largely forgotten. Valkyrie Profile 2. Now myself, I heavily invested in its predecessor, but I have never played this sequel. It was released exclusively for the PS2 in 2006, and it actually takes place hundreds of years before the original story. It did receive generally positive reviews, but it was criticized for its high degree of difficulty and convoluted equipment and skills interface. To drive my point of being lesser known, this game actually received the IGN Award for Best Game Nobody Played in 2006, so there's always that. At least you won something. Ghoul Patrol on the SNES is actually the next in line from the ever-popular Zombie Ate My Neighbors series. Now, it was created from a third party instead of LucasArts, but it still did a really good job at keeping the original look and feel of the first game and expanding on what made it so charming in the first place, while staying true to the original and what really made it a fan favorite. If you like the first game, then this is definitely one that you'll want to pick up, check out. Toe Jam and Earl 3 for the Xbox. Now, the first 2 games were released in the early 1990s for the Sega Genesis, but a decade later, they shoot this out like a cannon out of left field and bring it back. Whereas the first 2 games were highly praised, even though they are completely different in gameplay. 1 and 2 are not really even the same game other than the characters and a name. That's deserving of a video of its own, but this game tries to combine both of those games with updated 3D graphics, and for the most part it does it pretty well. but it did get mixed reviews with people saying it has a great sense of humor and fun co-op, but it does have like some dialogue that just kind of gets annoying and doesn't really hold up over the years. So if you're a fan of Toe Jam and Earl, this is definitely one to check out. Heart of the Alien is the one that really surprised me the most when I was doing research. This is the follow-up to Another World, or as we know it here in the States, Out of This World, and the original was so unique when it was first released for the Super Nintendo. I fondly remember being killed immediately after dropping into the water, and then pretty much every screen after that until I figured out how the gameplay worked. It was very unique. I mean, if you haven't had a chance to play Out of This World, I highly recommend it. It's a visual kind of masterpiece for the Super Nintendo at the time. But this sequel was released exclusively for the Sega CD, which really crippled its availability to many gamers, and what a shame that is. This game takes place directly after the ending of the original, and you take on the role of Buddy, who was your alien friend in the first game. This received really good reviews, with many sources claiming it was actually better than the original, and is worth playing so you can close out the story. On a side note, however, the original creator, Eric Chahi, said the sequel didn't live up to his expectations and he disowned it. He claims it is not canon, but since there is no sequel being made from him, I guess you can decide whether this is canon or not. Up next is good old Tetris II, released for the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo, and the Game Boy in '93. Now, it's obviously the follow-up to the smash hit and ultimate time waster, Tetris. You know, being the follow-up to one of the greatest games of all time is no easy task, but Tetris 2, they tried to make a solid effort. It takes on more of a Dr. Mario feel, with the lining up of colors taking precedent over the basics of just filling in gaps and creating lines for big points. It's worth a look, but it isn't even as good as its direct competitor from Sega, which was Columns, so, it tried hard, but, to follow up something like Tetris is a tall order, and frankly, it's really more like a Dr. Mario knockoff. So, if you're not that interested in it, you're not missing a whole lot. Up next, we're going to pop into the Final Fantasy series. Now, this is going to be Final Fantasy XII Revenant Wings, released for the Nintendo DS in 2007. And it has similar gameplay to its PS2 predecessor, but it makes use of the DS's dual screen and stylus, and it did receive really favorable reviews. So if you're a Final Fantasy XII fan and you want to keep that story of the Sky Pirates going, definitely pick this one up. Another game that I fondly remember playing back in the 90s was Rock and Roll Racing, and I had no idea that this sequel, Rock and Roll Racing 2 Red Asphalt, was released in '98 for the PlayStation. Blizzard was the creator of the original game, but in this sequel, Blizzard had nothing to do with it, and you can kind of tell it really became more of just an average vehicular combat arcade racer, and in the 90s those were so popular and there were so many better games out there that did it. So unless you're just a huge Rock and Roll Racing fan, this one's really not one that you have to check out. Moving on to Pac Man 2, The New Adventures. You know what? Sometimes the old adventures are best, and this is really no exception. So how do you follow up one of the most iconic games in history? Well, this is how you do it. You completely change the formula that made the timeless classic a smash hit, and you turn your sequel into a point-and-click adventure. And I'm not joking. Gone are the mazes, the ghosts, and the charming sound effects of the original. You now basically point Pac-Man in a general direction and hope he does what you say. Kidding aside, it actually received decent reviews, but like many follow-ups, it just never came close to the success or the longevity of the original. And, if you're going to stick with Pac-Mania, you got to stick with the original Pac-Man and Miss Pac-Man. In closing out this list today, we're actually going to go into a prequel, and one that I think I remember hearing about, but it flew right over the top of my mind, and that's Supersonic Acrobatic Rocket-Powered Battle Cars. Whew, what a name. This game is actually, like I said, a prequel to the ever-popular online hit that's easy to play but difficult to master, Rocket League. Now, this prequel really didn't sell that well, but it had a super loyal fan base, and so Psyonix decided to make a newer and improved game, which is now what we know as Rocket League. So I'm glad that there was a few loyal followers and that Psyonix decided to make the newer one, because Rocket League, if you haven't had a chance to play it, is a lot of fun, a great pick up and play co-op game. Alright guys, what'd you think? I hope there was at least one surprise on that list. I'm sure a couple of them were not surprising at all, but I hope that at least one of them got you and you said, wow, I want to play that game, or I want to check it out, or I didn't realize it existed. So like always, I appreciate you guys so much. Thanks for all the support. Please like, comment, subscribe, share. I appreciate all the support and the comments, even if they're trolly. So with that being said, guys, have a great rest of the week, and I'll keep the content coming.